Um, uh, Brianna, do you want to start then? Tell me where you are with with your assignments.
I'm pretty much just on the last one, the earthworks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still trying to think on what like I could do. I have an idea of going to get grapevines
Mm-hmm.
and then what's it called? Weaving them together.
Yeah, yeah. Uh,
Um,
It's a good idea.
so yeah.
Actually, remind me a second, you guys, because I can't remember now that I'm doing four versions of this with you guys. I don't remember. Have I gone through the assignment with you guys?
Yeah.
I have.
I read it.
Okay. Because I've gone through it pretty extensively when I go through it. So I just want to make sure that all of you have heard that. Yes?
Oh, I missed Monday.
Okay, Clarissa, you have. Brianna, you've read through it. Jason, you.
I've read.
Okay. Tell you what, let me just go through it as a way here. I'm going to share my screen and let me just go through it. And Clarissa, I apologize. Some of this is going to be repetitious for you, but I think we'll still be okay. All right.
This is the third time I've heard it then.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I tell you what. Let me not do that then. If this is the third time, there's no reason for you to sit through it again. So let me start with you, and then make sure you're on the right track, and then maybe I'll come back and go through it for Brianna and Jason. Okay? Let's do it that way. So Clarissa, why don't you start us?
Still drying oranges. I eat a lot of those.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, I haven't gotten to do like the deep walk I wanted to do because I have a 10-page paper due tomorrow and then a 20-page. So sadly, I have not had the time to go do my walk like I want.
Mm-hmm.
But I think once those are done, I'll be able to do it. But I'm thinking, I have a lot of different ideas. I keep looking at like the palm tree leaves because they're really easily separated. So I'm contemplating maybe weaving those. I'm drying the oranges and they all look really different and they're kind of cool. They're cool looking.
Do you have one right there that we can see or anything like that?
No, they're outside. They're in the back, but I'll show them on Monday. But they're like, I don't know. I cut my oranges. My big orange is different than my little ones. The little ones are all one perfect spiral, and the big ones, I cut the top and the bottoms off, and then I slice down. So I have these two perfect like little circle ones, and I really like how they look because they look like mushroom tops. But
Yeah, the idea is really, really a good idea, I believe. You know, the basis of what you can do there. I think if you want to just take a picture of them drying and upload that to the drafts folder, that'd be great. Because again, I can maybe be more helpful to you in terms of possibilities of how to either connect them or that kind of thing. So just to kind of update Brianna and Jason a little bit on what you're doing. So Clarissa has, she's using as one of her, well, actually it kind of sounds like you might be deciding between the two, or you might combine both palm leaves, which you have in your yard, I guess, or close by, and you eat a lot of oranges. So so peeling those oranges and working with them, they're both really, really excellent resource materials to try and work with. I like the creative thinking there quite a bit. So maybe with you, I have two thoughts. One is, I know that you've been, having ideas in your head or playing around with possible ways of connecting these or how you might build with them. So keep doing that, of course. But the other one is the concept storytelling symbolic side here. And so, since you've heard this 3 times, that is a major aspect of what we're doing on this one, right? So thinking about, and we did a little bit of that with the totem project as an initial or warm up maybe for this idea. So the concept storytelling part is really important. Do you have any thoughts there?
No, because at this point I'm just kind of gathering stuff. I'm gonna put it in front of me and see what's up.
Hmm.
The only kind of idea I've had that I don't think I'm gonna be able to do is I've seen a lot of those posts. They're like from artists. They're usually like in the Netherlands, but they make like fairy houses. They get like
Hmm.
acorns and they like stack shingles with pine cones, and they're so cute and they're little fairy houses, and I love that. But the concept is very, I don't know, it's very finite. Like it's, this is clearly a house. You don't, there's no question that it's a house.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I think there'd be a theme behind it because I think that's, I don't know. I feel like fairies, everything like that represent like some sort of like wonder and like, you know, some kind of like a good energy that we kind of need right now. But I don't know if I'm gonna be able to make a fairy house, but I kind of want to because I think fairies are neat. I think the little fairy houses are so cool.
Yeah. Okay. So I like that seed of an idea as well. I think that there's possibility there. And you said you had some reservations about being able to make it possibly. So one of the things I wanted you to think about is if you use the orange peels to make a house like the way we think of our houses, and typically it's a box and it has an angled roof kind of thing, I don't think that's a good direction. I think instead more of, well, think of all the different ways that houses or homes are constructed around the world in different cultures, in different countries, in different climates. You know, we have everything from grass huts to adobe structures, things in caves, things in trees, things out of brick, things that are very tall, things that are low to the ground, things that are underground. And then we have these fantasy kinds of homes. And we even have real ones that people live in where we see alternative housing. And of course, currently there's still a thing of tiny houses going on and mobile homes and all these other kinds of things that people have made houses out of pre-existing structures. So people will take water towers and make them into homes, or train cars and make them into homes, and so forth. So at any rate, what my purpose here is to help you expand your idea of what a house might look like. And so as we go into this fantasy kind of house, it even opens up those doors wider. So, and one of the things is, well, you've seen the way that other people have interpreted what a fairy house might look like. I would also suggest don't necessarily try to copy that version. Or imitate it, I should say. Instead, think about the things that are interesting to you about fairies. And you mentioned them some of those things already, like hope, for example, and so forth. I think those follow that thread. So how you can interpret the idea of hope, or how you can interpret the idea of fantasy, or how you can interpret well, what would a fairy live in? You know, how big are fairies? And let that help you much more than trying to imitate how someone else has already done that. Okay, that way you will be telling your own individual story. It's kind of like, well, okay, the fairies in the Netherlands live in homes that look like this that you've seen, but what do they look like when they are here in California, or you know, wherever? And that's going to be my main suggestion for you here, because you need to explore this concept storytelling side a lot, and express that a lot in what you finally do. So we don't want that to just kind of, well, whatever I end up with, now I'm going to make up a story. So we're trying to have the story or the concept drive and be a main influence on what we create here. You've heard me use in the past the phrase form follows function. So in this case, the form of the fairy house should be determined by the important things, or the cool things that you want to express about where and how a fairy lives, and then take that even further, so that those things in fact inspire us, or they are comforting to us in this time that we're living in right now that's highly stressful. That way that we've got this whole story, and that's the content that now determines what the form will look like. So form following, coming after, the content being determined. Now, does it mean I have to 100% have this all worked out? No, it doesn't mean that. It just means that I have a really good thought of what I want to try to express first in terms of a story or symbol or that first. And you have some of that in the sense that you've got, I would say you have a theme. You have a theme about, well, what would a fairy house look like? But I want you to develop that theme more. I guess that's what it is. Develop the theme a little bit more. You could even think of it like writing a story or writing a description first, if you wanted to go that way, if you'd like to write. But it sounds like you're in the midst of a lot of heavy writing right now, so maybe that doesn't work for us at this point in time. But you could do that, right? You could have a story that you are interpreting now and how these fairies live. For me, way before the Lord of the Rings movies came out, so I'm kind of dating myself here, it was quite a while ago, but the movies weren't out. They were just the books, and The Hobbit, and those books were written a long time ago.
Yeah.
Right? So before the movies came out, I did a series of paintings about what I thought a hobbit would look like based on the descriptions in the books. And so I did these paintings, and I really liked them. And I thought, well, I'm really onto something here, right? Well, 3 months later, the movies came out, and then and now everybody had they were related. My hobbits didn't look that different from the hobbits that were in the movies, but I no longer had a unique thing going here, because the movies had a lot more people watching them than I had looking at my paintings. At any rate, I was interpreting something in a fantasy kind of way because of what I read about hobbits. And that might be kind of similar here to what you have read about or heard about in terms of fairies. So I'm saying use that more as what's your inspiration, as opposed to the image that someone else has created about them. Okay? So that's my main message to you here, I think, today. I really like the material choices that you have going. And I suppose the other one I should mention here is that you should, of course, also be thinking about the site or the location that this is going to be, So if we, and that ends up being where you take the picture of it.
That's why I haven't done anything solid yet, because I haven't walked around yet, because I have ideas for a second, but I want to see where first before I have any kind of official final decision. I haven't been able to do that yet, so.
Yeah, and that's what you mentioned right at the very beginning. And I think, and so I just, yes, that's exactly what you should do. And as an example, you might be walking around and let's say you've got a tree, and I'm just going to make this up, but let's say you have this really old, gnarly tree that's in your yard or close by. And you see, it's just this ancient looking tree, right? And so maybe you make this fairy house so that it exists in the tree or next to the tree. For whatever reason, when I think of these characters, creatures like fairies, I think of tree fairies. You might think of them a different way. They might be like I think of if you were saying trolls, then I would say maybe a bridge. Okay, does that help a little bit here, I hope? Yeah? Do you have any other questions for me? Because otherwise I'm going to let you go.
No.
If you want. Yeah?
Yeah, no, that's everything.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go over the whole assignment for Jason and Brianna. If you want to hang out for that, that's fine. If you want to get on with other things, that's okay as well. Okay? Okay. See ya. Okay, so for Jason and Brianna, I am going to share my screen then now and kind of walk us through the basics of the assignment. You heard me say a little bit about that already. Let's see here. And before I get going on this, I'm not up to speed on everything that everyone has sent in to me so far. So I apologize. I don't know if you sent me in your final pictures of your totems yet. Have you? Yes. Okay. Excellent. So I will look for those. I apologize. I'm through about half, and I'm actually making a website for all of your work. So because we won't be able to have any critique or anything like that, and so there'll be a website with all of your work from all of your assignments throughout the semester on there, so you guys can see what each of you have done. And so I'm putting up your pictures and also your comparison papers. So I guess that's the other thing I should remind us of, is make sure that you turn in that comparison paper for the last one's not a comparison paper, but a summary, reflective kind of paper about the totem project. And yeah. Okay, so on the Earthworks project. This one is one that I did a while ago, and the majority of this does fit into what our assignment is about, but there are also some things that might you might have questions about, because I didn't think that was an Earthworks. And so that, because I see things in there that are man-made. I thought we were supposed to only use natural objects, and it's located inside, it's not outside. So what's the deal here? That would be a question I might have. So let me explain that a little bit. And I also want to use that as a way to introduce this storytelling, symbolic kind of idea that I've been referring to. That's an important part of this assignment. So let me go there first. And so the storytelling part, the backstory of this particular piece, trying to be storytelling, is that I was kind of looking at history and looking at, well, what was the beginning, or what were some things that caused the beginning of civilization? Why did civilizations begin, and what were some things that marked that time? And there are 3 or 4 of them. One of them was the ability to plant crops and then be able to have animals there and not have to move around, not have to follow the herd for hunting or just scavenge, but people could be located more in one place. And the first crop that actually signified that was hay. And so, okay, so I'm going to use hay as my material. And then I thought, well, what shape or form can I use this, or put this hay into, that would also be symbolic? And since I was looking at the beginning, or trying to say something about the beginning of civilization, I thought a pyramid might be a good shape for me to explore. So the pyramid being the idea that, well, I have something there's a base, and it builds up towards a pinnacle or a goal kind of idea. So that's why I created a structure here, an armature underneath of chicken wire and wooden corners, and then got some bales of hay and took the hay out of the bales and stuffed them into the chicken wire, and that's what makes the main form of the pyramid. The top, though, isn't hay. The top is copper. And so that piece is the man-made one, and it's supposed to symbolize kind of like the jewel or the goal, or the that's the main point of the pyramid, but it's what we're building up towards. And then, so that's the main piece, but then we have other things here. We've got this block and tackle, or system of pulleys and rope, that is on the top. And if you look at the very top of the image, there is a big wooden beam up there suspended from the ceiling, that in turn the pyramid is hanging down from it. So the pyramid is actually floating off the ground by about 6 inches. It's held up by the rope. And then the rope comes down and is tied to another big beam on the floor. So what's that about? So what I was trying to do here was reference the location where and the means how hay for centuries was kept or put up, and that's in the hayloft of a barn. And since medieval times, then they used block and tackles and rope to get it up there. So this beam on the top and the beam on the bottom, they're both old gnarly kinds of beams that you might see in an old barn. And these are old wooden pulleys. And so I'm kind of trying to suggest that a location where we would have found hay for centuries in a barn. And then around on the floor, there are these rows of loose hay, and they're kind of there to reference furrows of hay when it's cut in the field right before it gets bundled into a bale of hay. So that's the backstory of this particular piece. That's the symbolic part. Does it mean everyone will get all those things from it? Not necessarily. But I think people, and so the storytelling part means that there's something about what you create that it's evident that what you've done is purposeful and has a meaning. It's not just accidental. It's not just arbitrary. And so then the visual quality suggests that, and then hopefully people want to find out what is that story, or they try to interpret what it could mean. So that's the level of storytelling that I'm talking about. So what you do, the shape, the materials, how you put it together, implies that there's some meaning behind how you've put it together, and then, there is. So you have that inspiration. So the other part is I need to talk about with this is the man-made pieces. So the majority of your piece, like this one, does need to be made out of natural materials. So in this case, that's hay. But then you can add some other elements that are man-made or manufactured, we could say it that way. So in this case, we, the rope, the dimensioned wood into the beams, the block and tackle, the copper. So those are relatively minor compared to the overall thing being made out of a natural material. So you can do that. All right, so now I want to come down here, and as I know you've read through the assignment, but I want to maybe talk about it a little bit. So one of the things, and you heard me talking about that a moment ago with Clarissa, that you must think of where the location is that your piece is going to. Maybe I should read the first sentence first. So this is your last assignment. It's your chance to bring together all of the concepts that we've been exploring throughout the semester, and then thinking about how that which we create as human beings can relate to the natural environment. So that's the overall purpose of what we're doing. There are three specific things that you need to do. One is you need to think about the location that your piece exists in. That piece can be any size. The hay one I just showed you is pretty big, but it doesn't have to be. That size is up to you. But it must be with a particular location in mind. Then when you send in your photograph, that we see a photograph of it in that location. It must be primarily made from organic natural objects, materials. Those can be reformed, combined, or altered according to any of the sculpture processes we've been exploring. So the hay one, it has an armature in it. So we have, and then we are actually modeling it or molding it. Modeling would be more correct here, because of that underlying armature. So the way we used that, of course, was with the clay. And then my example earlier here is with hay. Your concept has to be symbolic. So you heard me talking about the fairy concept or theme that I suggested to Clarissa she needs to develop now. To succeed with this, you first need to, again, spend some time revisiting the sculptural idea, that idea primarily voiced by an object that occupies space, a form that occupies space, but also surrounds space and all the other details that we've talked about. But there's two major differences on this one. One is that this is the most contemporary approach to sculpture, or kind of sculpture, that we've kind of tried to do in this class, meaning that contemporary sculpture is kind of a departure from totally relying on the sculptural idea, which has kind of directed how people make sculptures for centuries. But within, I would say, since the maybe mid-60s, 1960s, up until now, the majority of contemporary sculpture isn't necessarily driven by that concept any longer. It's a consideration, but it's not the main thing. In most cases, contemporary sculpture is much more dependent on exploring the concept behind it. And that's why I've been spending so much time referring to the storytelling aspect. So the underlying concept becomes a major part of this particular assignment, much more than the earlier ones. Also, and so then the final solution, if it's based on concept, is actually less about how form occupies and surrounds space, the sculptural idea, and more about the choice and arrangement of the material that you use and the location that you place it in. So that's going to be a little more difficult to be switching it's not that we're no longer thinking about the form, it's just that, you know, if you think about the wood piece, for example, when you were carving that, we were absolutely paying attention to the form as the main thing. We didn't have a concept necessarily in mind. You might have individually, but that was not, you weren't trying to make or interpret a theme or anything like that, other than it needed a whole, but they were practical form things. It had to have a whole, had to be organic form. So in this case, that isn't the main thing that you're always thinking of now. It's the concept, the storytelling part, much more, and the choice of material that helps you to do that. So, because I know that that's a difficult thing to do, I wanted to give you some prompts or questions or examples of questions that you could ask yourself to help you get there. So, for example, you might ask yourself, well, how am I actually going to develop a concept or message to communicate through this kind of sculpture? And you might then say, well, what kind of messages are possible? Jagger. And so as examples of those types or categories of messages, they can be really broad. So like with Clarissa's, we might say that it's within the realm of fantasy. And my other examples here are, well, it could be environmental, it could be personal, it could be psychological, social, industrial, any of those, so real broad kind of categories. As you might, in fact, relate the message that you're telling to your major, or some other hobby or some other interest that you have. You could think of it that way as the broad message category as well. You might ask yourself, how does the choice or location affect the overall piece? And an easy one there is, well, is it does this location help it because it's in harmony with what I've used, the materials I've used, chosen, or is it in contrast to it? An easy example of that particular idea would be, well, I create this very organic looking thing and I put it in a very industrial looking location. So now I'm doing this because of contrast. The example that I talked about with Clarissa, with the fairy house and the tree, that would be because of harmony. Okay, so how does the method of creating the sculpture affect the result? And I kind of have already talked about that. These different versions of that we've explored: subtractive, additive, modeling, and casting. I need to change this casting for examples from bronze to plaster, though, because you're no doubt not going to be able to cast bronze or plaster, but you might be able to cast sand. And so you'll see at the bottom of the page, you know, just like sandcastles at the beach. That's a version of casting. How did the choices of material, media, working, or finishing that material affect the end result? And again, does it happen because of harmony or contrast? Think about the materials. Are they in harmony? Do my choices of wood, stone, in fact, work together? And metal and plastic, again, man-made materials, but they could be used in a minor role. And then are those materials smooth, shiny, rough? Do they have texture? Are they reflective? Are they translucent or transparent? Any of those things. You also want to think about how they influence the concept or story. How may the use or reference to symbols make a difference? So I talked about in that hay piece, the reference to a pyramid shape as a symbol and how that might play a part. But you can also pick symbols that have some even more specific suggestion in them. So they might be a religious or spiritual symbol, they might be political, it might be an ancient symbol, something from a language, it could be a letter or word, it could be directional, locational, etc. And then, of course, you have to know what materials are available to you on site. And this is probably the one that most people jump to first. In fact, I kind of almost suggest that you do this first, because you might have some ideas that you'd like to do, but since we're stuck at home, you can't get those materials now. So I get that. It adds another level of restriction to a certain degree. But I also want to say that as it relates to creativity, that we need to really accept the fact that creativity does not happen when we can do whatever we want and have an overabundance of material and money to do it. That's not true. Truly creative results happen not only in sculpture, but in anything, medicine, anything, happen when there are some restrictions to, a problem to figure out. So, of course, the main problem that the whole world is trying to solve right now and requires creative thinking to solve it is, in fact, a solution or a cure for the coronavirus. So that's what I mean by applying that true creativity happens with some kind of restrictions. One of the major restrictions that you have right now is you have to see what materials you have available to you at your house. And that's going to be a huge range of difference from one person to another. Some person living in an apartment in a big city maybe doesn't have a yard. And that adds something else that's quite different from someone who's perhaps living in the country and has many acres perhaps to draw from. In either case, there are different materials there. And so the first thing that you should do with this is inventory what you have available. And you have to walk around to do that. And that's what Clarissa was referring to, that she hasn't had a chance yet to do that. But you need to walk around with a paper and pencil and just consciously write down what are the various natural things that you see around you. They might be pebbles. They might be, well, I've got this little plot of 1 by 1 dirt over here. I have one tree and there are leaves on it. I have a lawn to cut and I have grass clippings. I have leaves that have fallen off trees. I have twigs. I have branches. I have rocks, stones. Any of those things, you need to take a conscious inventory of what that is first. Now, the other version of this is, well, maybe I need to eat, and some of the foods that I get perhaps are something like oranges, or I don't know, nuts, or something that comes that has a shell, or I peel it, or something like that has natural organic aspects to them. And it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the shell or the the peel. It could be the actual thing. So let's say the oranges, maybe I use a bag of oranges. You know, and I don't have an orange tree at my house, but I get it from the grocery store or have it delivered from the grocery store. So that's a possibility as well. And then the last one here is, can I make a different version of what are the natural elements around me? So an easy example of that is, well, I have dirt and I've decided to add water to it to make mud, and then with the mud I can form bricks out of it, or I can mold it or model it. Then maybe I want to dry it out and create cracks in it, or you know, there's a lot of possibility with that as I think of what materials that I have that I might be able to change. The grass clippings was one I mentioned earlier. The mud from dirt is one I'm mentioning right now. Okay, so now I want to show you some examples of sculptures that are working in this earthworks kind of direction. And these guys are all contemporary with the exception of one. And so I want to talk about their work. So this is Patrick Doherty, and he actually, the closest, we're not all up here in Northern California right now, but some of his works are over in Napa. They're all around the world. What he does in some cases is creates kind of an armature of sapling trees, the bendable tree trunks, but they're relatively small, like 2 inches, 3 inches perhaps in diameter, but so he can bend them. That becomes the armature, and then he weaves smaller twigs or branches over them, and that's how he creates some like this. All of his pieces don't look exactly like this, but they're variations of what he calls stick works. And so with each of these examples, I put one picture there and the person's name. Above it is a link that you can see other works by them. So, so Patrick Doherty. The next person is Andrew Goldsworthy. He's also very contemporary, and you can see some similarity between Goldsworthy's approach on this piece to this piece of Doherty. Again, both of them don't do exactly the same thing all the time, but I picked these two because there is a similarity between them, but there's a difference. One is that on Goldsworthy's piece, you can see that on one side there are these little twigs, and the other side they're logs. And in front of this corner, there's a little hedge. So what he's doing is starting to explore this concept of morphing or evolution or gradual change. We could say it in any of those ways. So if we said that out here, this hedge is a growing, living plant, but it's not wild. It's been manicured, it's been pruned into a particular shape by the gardener landscaper or Goldsworthy himself, but it's definitely shaped nature that's growing. And then we have big logs here that are cut that gradually become smaller branches down to the twigs on this side. So we could interpret that story in a variety of ways. We could say that, well, that's maybe the life of a plant or tree, but we could also say it's a symbol for life in general. You know, it's young here, it's growing, it gets older, it gets more fragile, frail, and that. So it could be that kind of thing too. So there's a lot of possibility of interpreting the concept here because of this gradual change in use of form. This one is the largest one, and it's the oldest one in here. This was created by Robert Smithson back in 1970. It's on Great Salt Lake in Utah. And this path was made by using road building, earth moving equipment. You can drive out on this. It's like a road. It's called Spiral Jetty. This picture, it's a little movie. The picture that we're seeing right now, it was taken during a time of the year when the water in the lake is low, and at some other times of the year the water is up above it. You can still see it, but it's submerged. And a jetty, of course, is something that is man-made out in bodies of water to control the waves. So he's saying something about that. He's also interpreting this idea of evolution by use of a spiral shape, where up here, Goldsworthy was exploring it by a gradual different size of the same material. So a different interpretation of morphing or gradual change. It's Robert Smithson. This one down here I put in, it's a little DIY. Its main purpose is how to create a horse out of just gathering up driftwood. But the main reason I put it in here is because he walks us through his process of walking around his property, picking up what he wants to use, and then how he goes about assembling it. So whether or not you wanted to make a horse or use driftwood or not almost becomes secondary to seeing an example of process here. Yeah, so that's that one. Down below here are some student examples for this assignment. So the only difference between what them and you is that, of course, they weren't restricted to just home. So they could go to other locations. But other than that, it's the same. And these are all student examples. So in these four, each of them are interpreting this idea of gradual morphing. So the very first one, we can see these little tiny pebbles out on the outside of the circle, and they get bigger as they come together, and it's almost a monument, has that kind of feel to it. If we didn't see this background here, we would have no idea how big or how small this was. But because we can see the cliff behind it, it kind of lets us know that, well, it's not huge. But if you didn't see that back there, we would have no ideas. These down here, since we don't see anything in the background to give relation, a comparison to, we don't know how big they are from the picture. So this could be as big as Smithson's spiral jetty, or it could be as small as your hand. But each of them, again, are looking at this different ways of pushing gradual change. This one's going down into a hole. This one is level in the back with the sand ground back there and builds up, so it's several inches high at this end. And this one's flat. This one creates one closed specific shape of a circle. These suggest circles, but they're more open and suggestive of that overall shape. The ones down here make more perhaps recognizable patterns. This one, I actually should have put it up in here with this one, because both of those by two different students are just like 50 feet apart from one another. You can see similar material being used in those red rocks, but a different approach. And he was also exploring this idea of gradual change by how he stacked them up. But it doesn't necessarily say monument here. This one leads up to one piece. That's why it's more of suggesting a monument story. These more recognizable pattern arrangements, and perhaps more literal as flowers or something. This one, I put this in here because sometimes when we talk about these kind of pieces that are all abstract, then I know that sometimes different students will say, I just don't get it. I need, what's it supposed to do? I need to have a practical purpose. And if you feel that, then know that you can have a practical purpose. So this one is the top part. It's doing all those things we've been talking about, but it's actually an outdoor pizza oven known as a forno. And so the purpose of this was to make an outdoor pizza oven. But it's done with natural materials and arranged in all the same things that we've been referring to. So if it helps you to say you're making a practical piece of some kind, you can do that. Down here, this is the same piece, two different pictures of the same piece. It was created in front of the studio building. It's little rocks and gravel-sized rocks. that he gathered together, and then in his hands went around and shaped how that flowed, those rocks, the gravel flowed out of his hands and made this. And his original intention was to suggest the stump and roots of a tree. But when, as a group, we were all talking about it, and people, well, is this a giant spider? Could this be also a reference to an earthquake? You know, I remember that those were two other interpretations of this. And in either case, they're all storytelling concepts that can come from looking at this thing. And it's just gravel. Kind of similar to that is this one. There's just a portion of the sidewalk, but it was all on the other side of the studio building, opposite the sculpture building there in the courtyard. And he used sawdust. So it's sawdust making these different patterns that were all along the sidewalk. It's pretty interesting. This one is just another reference back to stacked rocks. And I have several of those examples from the totem assignment that you can refer to if you'd like. I was thinking some more about this the other day, and you know, historically we have everything from Stonehenge. That's an example of this. It has a spiritual aspect to it. And something else came to mind as well, and now I can't remember, but it just popped into my head yesterday. Down below here, there's some other things, other thoughts. So one way of shaping nature as a landscaper is like a topiary. So here's this little tree that's been trimmed to make this spiral kind of shape. So you can do that. You can think of yourself like a landscaper if you would like. Now here's someone who's done that idea of topiary, where the final piece are these lemur animals, you know. So you can go that literal as well if you would like. So this, of course, is just a picture of a big mountain. You're not making a mountain, but you might be doing some things that reference the layering or the strata of a mountain. So we can see these different sedimentary layers of rock and clay that are exposed on this mountain. And that layering also, of course, is a result of a lot of time passing. But it's a result of that. It's a result of pressure and heat. It's got all, we know that as that little bit of geology. But the concept of layering, we see in all sorts of things that you could play off, you know. So that's why that is in here. And down here, this is an ant farm. So that idea of, I'm not saying make an ant farm, but I am saying that, oh, well, here's a natural process that other animals, insects, perhaps birds create. Can I work with that? So a bird's nest, a wasp's nest, you know, other kinds of things like that might be something that you can work with. And then here's a picture of, earlier when I was talking about making mud and drying it out in the cracks. So here's a photograph of that. And of course, you can make that happen on your own in a much smaller scale if you wanted to create texture. And then the storytelling aspect of it, well, what does this mean? What does cracked earth mean? And, you know, thinking about that. The last one's down here. Here's some more topiary things. Here's a bird's nest, and here's a sandcastle as other kinds of materials that we might not think of otherwise. Okay, so that's my main thoughts there. So let's see. Jason, what do you think, or where are you at? What directions are you thinking about? What problems maybe?
Well, I don't the my backyard is very small,
Okay.
so I don't know if location would be like I don't think I'd be able to put it where I'd want to put it. So is it okay if in my summary I explain like where I'd have this piece located?
It is okay to do that. I get that problem. But I also want to say that because there is no size restriction, you
Mm-hmm.
might be creating a sculpture that's only as big as your hand.
Mm,
You know, it could be only as big as like a piece of jewelry, in fact.
right.
Okay. And so, with that in mind, there might
Mm,
be a location, even in the smallest of backyards, um, that can work here. So, don't totally discount that yet.
okay.
Okay.
And also for like materials, the only thing I could find were like a log and also some bricks.
Okay.
So um I'm worried that there's not gonna be a lot of form to it because I don't know. I don't think because I was looking at the examples earlier and like a lot of them weren't really like different from all points of view. You know how like we were always focused on like the form and how sculpture was like you have to look at it from different angles and you have to see something different. But I don't. Some of the 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 pieces that we saw didn't really exhibit that. So I was wondering if it was okay if we kind of use that too, like a lot of symmetry or yeah.
Yes, and so I know this is also kind of a confusing point because remember at the beginning I was saying that that this is an exploration, an introduction maybe to what contemporary sculpture is driven by. And I said that for centuries, up until like the last 50 years, almost all sculpture from all countries, from all time periods,
Mhm.
was primarily driven by what you just said, the idea, the sculptural idea. And so now when we've been doing that and with our previous 3 assignments, so now that's starting to make sense. And now I'm giving you the final assignment where I'm saying that's not necessarily the main thing now. Because the new thing that I've added on this last assignment is this approach to sculpture that is more of our time. And so when we see these sculptures that are created from our time, one of the things that happens, especially to any of us that maybe are not sculptors, we look at them and wonder, what is this about? We don't understand it. And because we have an idea that a sculpture is supposed to be more like what the sculptural idea expresses, interesting from all sides, that kind of thing, right? And so it's not that all contemporary sculpture doesn't do that, but it is a form of sculpture that did not exist really before 50 years ago. And so it's important that we try to explore, well, what are the things then that are important about, or what are contemporary sculptors trying to express when they don't make a sculpture that is following the sculptural idea? So that means that, well, if that isn't the main idea, what is the main idea? And I'm suggesting to you that the main idea here is the storytelling part, the symbolic nature. And it doesn't, and again, it doesn't mean that older sculptures didn't also do that. It just means that that wasn't the main thing. The main thing, or the first thing, was the look of the form and then getting the story. Contemporary sculptures kind of flipped that upside down and said, no, the main thing first is the story and then the form. That's why there's so much contemporary sculpture that is very temporary. It might last only a short period of time. I actually showed you one of those pieces at the beginning of the class, that the Cristo Valley curtain piece, you know, that well, I suppose some people would argue and say, no, it is interesting from all angles, but not, absolutely the more important thing is the suggestion of a story. Like, here's somebody putting a curtain across an entire mountain canyon. I mean, what's that about? You know, that's absolutely about the story. What does this mean? That comes across. Even if I don't know what it is, it's definitely going to make us think that. Now, if I see a picture of, or a sculpture of an animal, of a deer, I don't necessarily start asking right away, well, why the deer? I instead start looking at, wow, that looks realistic, or it's cool from all sides, or I like the texture, right? All of those things are questions or thoughts that are related to the form, not to the story behind it. So that's what we're trying to explore here, is the story that can be expressed by arranging materials. And the materials that we're arranging are primarily natural materials. Does that help a little bit there with that side of it? Doesn't necessarily help you with how to find what you're working with, but I hope it helps you to understand the difference between this assignment and the previous ones. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more though about the issue of materials. So you said a log and bricks. So the bricks we might be able to use if it's not the main thing. But if I have one log and several bricks, then that's not going to be true, right? Because the primary material there is going to be bricks that also, or it might be equal. We might see it as equal. Yeah. So with that log, I have one log. I can take the bark off the log. I can use a knife and cut it off. Now I have bark, and I have many pieces of bark I can use. I can also, perhaps, if I have an axe or a hatchet, I can split it. So now I have several pieces of wood that came from the log. I might, if I have, again, I don't. It's possible to cut the log into discs, or maybe use a knife, or maybe I have one log, but I carve into the log. I carve a face into the log. Okay, so it looks like a little tree person in the log. So those are ways that I can use this natural material without necessarily having an abundance of it. One of the things that it starts to seem like I noticed is that it starts to seem like I'm saying you have to use assemblage from, you don't. Remember I said you can use any of the previous techniques. So, and in this case, I guess I'm referring, if with the log, I'm talking about carving. Okay. So, and then you might say, well, I don't have sculpture tools to do that with. So what we do is we look at, okay, what kind of knives perhaps do I have? Or if I have a piece of metal that I can sharpen essentially on one end. And let me say it this way. So if we go all the way back in time to when people didn't have metal knives, they still made some pretty incredible sculptures out of natural material, right? How did they do this? Well, in some cases they were using bone tools or sharp pieces of rock, or, you know. So the challenge is to think about, well, what do I have available and what can I do with it? And so what I'm suggesting here, even if I only have one log, can I break that log down into smaller pieces? Or can I keep it one solid piece and carve into it, or assemble something to it, you know? I'm also suggesting that, and I know you've looked, but I want you to look again around outside and see what is there that's either growing, that's on the ground, or blows into the ground, or that kind of thing. And also, I don't know if you compost or anything like that, but what goes into the compost that maybe we could work with, eggshells, for example. You know, there might be some things there that you haven't thought of yet. Okay. So tell me, are you thinking, well, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I don't have any of that.
Oh, I don't really have anything right now. I think I just need to like think of more ideas because I don't. We don't have a compost. We don't have any tools. Like we have kitchen knives.
Kitchen knife can work here.
Yeah, but it's like I don't know. I have like roommates, and I don't know if I want to use. I don't want them to see me using kitchen knives for like a
Oh,
log that's outside. That's kind of I don't know.
yeah, it needs to be a knife that you're not going to then use back at the dinner table. That's for sure. So like I would be looking for an old one or something along that line, or one that you can sacrifice for a different purpose. Yes.
I'll definitely have to keep looking. I don't. It's very limited right now. But I don't know. I was kind of thinking of like using the bricks to like hold the log up, and like the log has a lot of like fungus on it, and I think that's pretty cool if I just show it off and have that as like the centerpiece or something, and then I don't know, just have the bricks supporting it somehow.
Yeah, and you might be able to take, is it a fungus or is it a lichen or something that you might even be able to
I'm
take
not
off?
sure. It kind of looks like a mushroom, but it's like growing off of it,
Oh,
and
got it. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So with that, you might even be able, if it's, let's say that you scrape that off and make it into a powder, and with the powder you like there were some examples there using sawdust or with gravel, so if I don't know how much is there of that, the mushroom fungus that's on there, but you can do that. You can do the same thing with, even if you have no other tools. Well, I mean, I'm sure that I'm pretty darn sure that like a can, that you had soup from, and you take that can lid, you can scrape things off that the bark, or into the bark, or into the I think it's just a matter of really looking close, because and alternative purposes for what you have. I'm not diminishing the fact that yes, this is an issue, but I am encouraging you to look even closer. And this is where the creative thinking comes in, because we're used to saying, well, if I'm going to carve something, I need a sculptor's knife. And I'm suggesting to you that that's not necessarily true. And we know that it's not true because people have been doing it for centuries without those tools. And so that, think about, and go, don't just sit inside and think of what's out there. Go out and really spend some time. Maybe it's just sitting right there on the porch and seeing what's there. Okay.
Yeah, I'll take a look.
Okay, great. Brianna, what are you thinking?
I'm still thinking on the lines of doing the grapevine and creating it into a circle. And then I'm thinking of objects that I want to play off time. So putting objects like rocks, or if I find something cooler, to represent the hours in time, and finding something that will create a shadow, so it's like a hand. But I just have a time thing stuck in my head.
I think time is a really good concept to explore. And one of the things that I want to say here is the concept is time. So don't take that to mean that you're going to make a clock. Clock is a timekeeping device, but it's not time. So time as a concept is better represented by something gradually changing, like those examples I was showing early on. Somehow something changes gradually by size, or gradually by color, or by space between the things. So a gradual morphing, but gradual change is going to help suggest that concept of time better than making a timekeeping device. So not a clock, not a watch, not a I was going to say not a sundial, but that's more possible with something like a sundial. Or I mentioned Stonehenge early on, and we know that there's all sorts of things that different cultures did by their arrangement, or carving holes in something that when the sun came through the hole, it marked a particular day of the calendar, that kind of thing. And I did say that you could make a practical thing. So I guess if you absolutely wanted to make a clock, you could, because that's what I said. I said you could make a practical thing. But I would encourage you to, before going directly to that kind of approach, is to think more on your concept, because you have a great concept with time. Okay? So that could be time standing still, time advancing, history, time into the future, our moment of time right now, time advancing. You know, there's a lot of different ways that we could look at that, right? One of the things that whenever someone says that concept of time to me, I can't get this one image out of my head. I was walking in the forest with this one time. It was in the winter. There was snow on the ground, and there's this one, and I saw it from a distance. It looked like a pile of sawdust, and I didn't think too much of it, because I thought, well, somebody was just in here and cut down a tree or cut a log or something. And I got closer to it, and I started realizing there's no cut trees here. This is fresh sawdust, and again, there was snow on the ground, so it was fresh sawdust. So I should have, if it was from a cut tree or a logger or something like that, I would have seen logs. I would have seen a stump of a tree left, and there was no such thing. So now it's starting to become a little mystery. So I go up to it and look at it closely, and then gradually I could see that, about maybe 5 feet up the tree trunk that was closest to that, I noticed that these ants were coming out of a little hole and dropping off a tiny little piece of sawdust, and that one would go in, another one would come out and drop a little piece of sawdust and go in and come out. And I, oh my gosh, it was like I never even saw it. And then I could focus in on these tiny little ants doing that. And so one by one little speck of sawdust, they were hauling out of the tree, one ant after another, dropping it outside, and it would fall down to the ground, and it made this big, like 3 foot tall mound of sawdust. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how long did that take? You know, how long have these ants been working on this? Is the entire tree inside hollow because of this? And I thought, wow, that time, that concept of time just really struck me because of that, you know? And so, I don't know, you're not going to make a pile of sawdust probably, but I, as an example of thinking about time as a concept, as opposed to how we keep track of time in our normal way, I guess, you know, looking at a watch or looking at a clock or something. Okay, so that's a bit of a challenge that I want you to think about.
Okay.
Okay. You also mentioned you had, it sounded like you had several different possibilities of material to work with. And so you don't have to use all of those things. Maybe try some different possibilities with each one, or a combination of one or two. There's a danger in putting together too many different materials. Doesn't mean you can't, but if I would say that one material needs to kind of dominate. So and then if you do decide to use the other ones with them, they take a secondary role. Their accents, that kind of thing, but have the overall piece that you could say, oh, the overall piece is made from leaves, or the overall piece is made from the grapevines. The grapevines, if you've got grapevines to work with, wow, that's a luxury. You should work there with the because those vines give you all sorts of possibility. Ivy, grapevines, any of those things, you can do almost anything that you want with them. You can make a basket with it, you know. On the other hand, you can make a stickworks like we saw with Doherty, or you can make a little tiny fairy house. You can make a big hobbit house, right? You know, we can take a lot of inspiration from what birds do when they make their nests. You know, if you've ever seen like you know what an osprey is? An osprey is a great big bird. It's like eagle-sized bird, and they make their nests on top of many times on top of telephone poles, on the very, very top of the telephone pole. But their nest are branches. They haul these branches up there. They're unbelievable. It's a little sculpture on the top of a telephone pole or on a cliff, but you usually, we see them is just on a highway and they're on the top of a telephone, but they're branches. They're not little twigs. They don't look soft at all. They're branches. It's amazing work of sculpture. And and so I guess the idea of weaving together different things with the grapevine or ivy even, you have a lot of possibility there, and bird's nests that we most commonly think of, like the little picture I put on our assignment page, it gives us some ideas that, well, we can create dimensional form there. Now, I've been talking today mostly about the form as secondary, but it's not something we totally dismiss. So at the heart of it, at the beginning, we have to have a story we're trying to suggest. But, you know, the Doherty's stuff has form, Goldsworthy's has form. Those are both weaving kinds of techniques. A bird's nest has form. Okay? So I think if you've got grapevines, I would really explore that possibility, more than just making a circle with them. Okay, the weaving possibilities there are real strong. All righty.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else from either of you? Okay. So if you want to upload any pictures of material or anything like that, it doesn't have to be something you've done with yet, but even the site or what, you know, so I have a much better understanding of your location possibilities, I guess, and also your possibilities for material. If you want to send any of those pictures up to the draft page, submission page for our assignment, I can maybe be more helpful, but that's just an option for you if you'd like. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Then if there's nothing else, I'll let you guys go. But I want to ask one more time. Any other thought? Okay. All right. Well, good luck with it. You guys stay safe, healthy and everything. And upload anything if you'd like to for me to take a look at, comment on. And otherwise, I will see you next time then. Okay? Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.